The objective of this video is to help teach students how to read Python, and this was partly inspired by a tweet I saw from someone where they were saying that it's ironic or it's frustrating that we try to teach students how to write code without teaching them how to read code. Just like when we were all young learning how to read and write, what came first? Well, the reading portion mostly came first, though we sort of do both hand in hand. I just thought for this video series I could kind of show you how I teach Python in class, small chunks at a time, and how I give students books like this O'Reilly one, and we read how to code, then we try to write the code, and then we read the code. So I wanted to make this video series just to show that process. And I think this is a unique approach, especially on YouTube. I haven't seen anyone teaching code this way. So this is just part of my big plan to share my ideas with the world. So we're going to pull our first example from this Python book. As you can see, it is 1,600 pages. But don't be afraid, let me skip down to the good stuff. Technically speaking, it says 1628 up here, but we don't need, to read table of content pages. Some of the introduction pages are not very useful to us. And for this video series, I don't promise we'll get through all those pages, but at least I'll give people a taste of what reading a book on coding is like and how I would suggest they approach it. Not to mention, I think for programming, my favorite way to learn programming is through examples. Coding is tough enough without somebody skipping the real-world examples to help tie in the relevancy. So at this point in the book, page 43 already, it says that Chapter 1 kicks things off by using a simple example, as in recording information about people. Sure, at the high school and college level this kind of sounds creepy, but it is definitely a real-world example. Many companies are doing that. I think you already know them without me sharing their names. One of them starts with an F, another one starts with a T, a big one starts with a G. Not to mention a lot of ISPs are looking to share this data, which to me seems really inappropriate, but I won't get into that. What I just want to teach students here is how to begin recording information about people in code and to think about creating this database that your boss or other people could refer to when they need to, for whatever reason they may feel like they need to. In one of my intro classes, we learn about Microsoft Access, and that's a great introduction to the concept of databases, and I show students how you can query specific types of data and then talk about how that could be a product that you sell to other companies. It says here, naturally, there are off-the-shelf programs for managing databases like these. I just mentioned one with Microsoft Access, but they're pointing out that by writing a program yourself, you have complete control over its operation, which is pretty cool. You can add code for special cases and behaviors that pre-coded software may not have anticipated. So as I always tell students, coding gives you great power, but with great power comes great responsibility. As you can see, by us creating a database that tracks information from people that may consider this type of information a very private thing. So here's the basics. Create records. You can have lists, and so we first start with a variable such as Bob, and we'll assign Bob several data types. In this case, first his first and last name, so there's a string, then his age, so there's an integer, then his salary, so there's an integer again, and then his job title, in this case software, which happens to be a string. Since arrays are fancy, we're going to call this a data structure rather than just a data type, because within the structure is a few different types of data. So before I go any farther, let me just really emphasize the idea that we can have a variable, you could call it whatever you want, like Mike, and then we can assign it a value. So here's a string. In this case, this is just his name. And if I wanted to see what the value of that variable is, I can type something like print, and then type in the name of the variable. After doing that, I just click run, and there's Mike with a capital M, because this is the value of this variable. And I always joke in class that the math people have it wrong. When a math person says 2x equals, so let's say 6, they call x a variable, but in this case, x can only be one number, the number 3. 2 times 3 is 6. The only time this variable changes is if the other side of the equation changes. So if this is a 10, now x is actually a 5. So there's not much variety in that variable in math class. But in programming, Mike if Mike changes his name, or if Mike wants to go by a more formal name, this variable can certainly change on the fly inside of a program. So take, for example, this age variable. People's age change all the time, I hope. A student in class today said, well, what if you die? Well, then I wonder maybe I could make this variable a 0. I don't know. Or maybe I would append the array and say, deceased. But regardless, variables could be more than strings. They can be numbers. So let's go with 16. And if I want to see what that age is, I just run it. So then I can do something fancy like put them together. So this forms a sentence. Michael is 16. But as you can see, I had to do something fancy right here. I had to use what's called a function to turn this number into a string. So that is into the number 16 to be printed, well, inside of a sentence. And I have an extra space right here that, as you can see, I can get rid of and run again and make sure it works the same way. That's something I encourage my students to do very often. Experiment with adding and deleting things. Let's say I only delete a single parenthesis. Does it break everything? Yes, it does. Okay, so I showed you some simple variable things. At this point in the lesson, the book says that we've just made 2 records. So if we jump back, and by the way, I'm on Code Playground on SoloLearn. You can find it just by typing in like Code Playground and then Python, and it's the second one it looks like. There's a lot of other websites like this one. I just use this, maybe out of habit in class. But this is also maybe the quickest way to get started, being able to run Python code inside of your browser. You could also run it inside of PowerShell. So I have PowerShell here. If I'm using a Linux machine, I can run it in a terminal. So many different ways to run. I'm just showing the simplest right here. So based on what the book just said, we created these 2 arrays. And as you can see there, I accidentally deleted the top part. That's like called the shebang. I'm going to run it and just see. Oh, I need to print something. So I'm going to run it and just see if it runs after I deleted maybe something important. It works, so I'm not going to worry about it. But then again, on second thought, I should not show you guys bad habits. At the very least, it's good etiquette to have this at the top of your program. Okay, so back to the book. It says we've made 2 records, and basically you saw I had copied what the book said right here. I might have changed things a little bit. But down here it says you've made 2 records, albeit simple ones, to represent 2 people, Bob and Sue. Each record is a list of 4 properties, so you got your name, age, pay, and job fields. I mentioned that. Now to access these fields, whether it's out of curiosity or you're about to sell some information, we simply index by position. So the result is in the parentheses here because it is a tuple of 2 results. So new vocab word for you, but we'll get to that later. So going back to my program, if I type in print Bob1, it shows us his age because Bob here has a name field, and then the age is the second thing. And because it's the second thing, we type in 1. I know, it makes a lot of sense, right? Well, in arrays, like in many things in computing, 0 is a very important number, so 0 is what we start with. So Bob Spaghetti is 0, 23 is the 1, $30,000 is the second spot, and software is the third. And just to test it out, you can type in any of these and see for yourself. So there you go. Now a cool thing that Python allows you to do is you can change the values. And then it gets even crazier right here when you start using built-in functions like split to change the array. Okay, so before I start changing people's salary, let me show you how to change the array. Type in the variable name, the position that you want to change. We're going to split that first and last name using the split function. Or method, I forget Python calls it. And it looks like all we have to type in is this box -1 to delete the first name there. And you notice I'm skipping some of the text. I mean, that's definitely how I approach programming books. But when in doubt, I go ahead and read it. Let me do that for the audience here. Processing records is easy with this representation. We just use list operations. For example, we can extract the last name by splitting the name field on blanks and grabbing the last part. And we can give someone a raise by changing their list in place. So wow, that actually helped right there. Like we need to create a blank, or we need to identify this blank in order to split that first field. So I'll go down here to my editor, create a new line, and I'm going to type in Bob, starting at that 0 place. I'm going to split it, and -1 should do the trick. Now when I delete this completely and I run the program, there's no output. And so that's the rough thing about maybe this part in the book, is you'd have to be following along using Python in the command line. That's what these 3 arrows are. So just so you know, that's the difference. Let me go back over here, manually type in Bob. This would be a very educational experience here because I have to experiment with the split. So if I just print out what's in the 0 place, it'll print the entire thing. So what if I took this entire thing and put it into the print command and then ran it? There we go, that worked. Now if you're wondering about how would I split it permanently, we'll get to that later, but it's good that you ask questions throughout the entire process. Let me finish though by talking about permanently increasing that salary. So maybe you can use that to make an inference as to how you would permanently split something. And then I'd end this video as an introduction to an array. So instead of using Sue, I'm going to go back to Bob, and there's a nifty little operator here. It's the star equal sign. So I'll type in Bob 2 just like they have it in the example, but I'll do the star and equal sign because what I'm going to do is take whatever value is here, times it by this integer, and then use this equal sign to store the result in that same position. So therefore, reading code is nothing like reading a book, or even reading an equation. So here we go, I'm about to experiment with this, and since I'm experimenting, I should probably create a print command for myself just to make sure it worked correctly. What I should be seeing now is this number multiplied by this number, and in essence what that will do is, let's write a comment, give Bob a 25% raise. So I'll run it. I still printed out his last name, so to get rid of that, a lot of programmers will just throw in a comment right there, hashtag. And yeah, when I reran it, that looks like $30,000 multiplied by 25%, or given a 25% increase, I should say. That's why you have to add the 1, of course. 1.25, that is. So cool. To summarize, we talked about how variables can be strings and integers. We talked about what an array is. That's a structure. It's a combination of many data types. I like how this website color codes it for you. Lots of text editors will do that for you. And then we finished by talking about this split command, which is a built-in feature of Python. And last but not least, this nifty operator, the star equal sign. So I hope this is helpful. This is a great process, I feel like, to tackling books on code. Nothing else, this is for the students in my class as a quick review. And in the next video, I'll really break down what's going on in this for loop. It does some tricky things, and reading it is just really tricky. So thanks for learning with me, and let me know if you have any questions.